All right, welcome everyone to the 2023 Progressive Summit. We are so excited to have you here today with us. Thank you for supporting our work. Thank you for supporting the summit. We could not do this every single year without you. My name is Annette Magnus, and I am the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress, which is our 501c4 organization, and Institute for Progressive Nevada, which is our 501c3 organization. This event today is being put on by Battleborn Progress. It is our 9th annual Progressive Summit. I can't believe we've been doing this for 9 years now, and I've been with the organization for 10 years. It's been a journey, and I am so excited to have our panels today, our guest speakers, our keynotes, and especially all of you, our activists, volunteers, and supporters. Thank you for everything you do to support our work. So what is Battleborn Progress if you're new to us, and what do we do? Well, Battleborn Progress is a progressive communications organization that is an integral part of the infrastructure here in Nevada. We have been here since 2009, and we are a proud member of the Progress Now family in 26 different states all across the country. We may be called something different in each state, and you're going to meet a few of our other executive directors and our national executive director today, but all of our work is the same: good, strong communications, messaging, and preparing you all for what's coming next, our legislative journey that's getting ready to start soon, and then obviously every election season doing what we do best, calling people out and holding them accountable. You know, we chose defending democracy, what's next, as our theme this year on purpose. We just defended democracy in 2022. We won some races, we lost some really painful races, especially our governor's race. But we're still growing in Nevada, and we're still going so strong. And it's because of every single one of you who has joined this fight with us and keep Nevada moving forward and keeping us progressing forward. But the fight is far from over, and you're going to hear that today and tomorrow from many of our speakers. There is so much left to do to defend our democracy and make sure that our democracy is strong here in Nevada, but all across the country. And we have to be a part of that fight. You and me and everyone on this journey with us today and tomorrow at the summit, it is imperative that you continue to fight this fight to protect democracy. And let's not mention, we have a whole legislative session coming up. So a big part of the Progressive Summit over the next 2 days is to prepare you all for the fight ahead and prepare you all for the journey that's coming next during legislative session. Our legislative session in Nevada starts on February 6th and goes through June 5th. And I'm moving to Carson City to be your voice and be your activist, but we're going to need every single one of you in this fight. So today during the summit, join us. You can visit our table, you can visit other partners' tables, sign up to volunteer, sign up to be an activist, and I'll explain how to join the tables in just a few minutes. This session, we're going to be really lucky if we can protect everything we've worked so hard for the past couple of years, but we're going to need you in this fight, and we're going to need to hold our elected officials accountable every single step of the way, and that's going to depend on you making your voice heard. So please take the tips and the tricks that you learn over the next 2 days and get involved in the fight during legislative session, and join me in Carson City. We'll be going up for the Nevada Women's Lobby Grassroots Lobby Days, Equality Days with Silver State Equality, our fabulous partners, and we're going to need you to join us up in Carson City. So what do we want to get out of the summit? Well, the biggest thing is I want you to enjoy yourself and be patient with our technology today. You cannot break Remo, so just be patient with it and practice with it. It's actually a really fun platform, and we want you to be comfortable with it. A few housekeeping items that are important to remember before we get started. Please, 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 please pay attention to this. Turn your microphone and camera off each time you log into Remo. So if you have to step away for a few minutes, that's totally fine. But when you come back, remember, turn your microphone off and your camera off. This will ensure your mic and camera are turned off when we release you on break. We don't want to catch you indisposed. We love y'all, but not that much. So please, when you come back or when you're going off to take a break, turn your camera and your mic off each time. That will just make sure nothing happens. That's weird today. When on break, feel free to visit our tables. So many of our partners are here today. So many of our sponsors are here today. And we are so proud to be with them in this fight. All you have to do is go to the little table, the little round table, double click on the table and start talking to switch to a different table and conversation. Double click the table you want to move to. That's all you have to do. Just double click on it and you can have a real live conversation during breaks. Note that there are multiple floors and you'll see a little setting that says 1, 2, 3, etc. on the side. So be sure to explore using the elevator and move to the different floors. When you're in a session, please only use the chat function to engage with your fellow attendees. If you have a question, please only use the Q&A function. And it will be monitored for questions directly for the panel when time permits. Again, chat function is to talk to friends and make new friends. Q&A function is to ask questions. I also wanted to let you know we do have closed captioning today. So if you need assistance, just find the closed captioning button in Remo and you can turn that on manually. Now, a few ground rules for today. Please be respectful to every speaker, panelist, and fellow attendee you meet. We want you to make new friends and have fun. Also, assume positive intent. Everyone is here to learn, and everyone learns at a different pace. Be constructive and educational with your feedback rather than shunning or being combative. Remember, step up, step back. If this isn't your first time at the summit, or if you have a lot of experience with these issues, let the new folks who are new to this space have the floor to ask questions and learn. Conversely, if you are new, please push yourself out of your comfort zone, ask questions, and meet new people. We want it to be a fun and respectful place. Speaking of being respectful, please be respectful to each other and the panelists, as we've said. If we see disrespectful behavior today, we will ask you to stop one time. And if you continue, you will be removed from the event. No questions. This is a safe space, so please feel comfortable sharing and learning. We all have different levels of activism present today, so please allow others to learn without judgment. And again, please ask questions. And finally, take care of yourselves today, ask questions, and meet new people. And please visit our tabling sponsors and talk to folks on the breaks. We want to meet you today. So many of our staff are all around today and excited to meet you. If you have questions, they're there to help you. Please put it in the chat if you need help. We were there to help you. And we would love to see folks share what they are learning and seeing here at the summit. So please lift the event up on our social media using hashtag Nevada Summit, and please tag Battleborn Progress when you do social today. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, again, use hashtag Nevada Summit and share our information today. We will be on social media all. And most importantly, a big thank you to all of our staff who put this together. They worked so hard to put these panels and things together for you today. They worked so hard to make this perfect for you. So please be patient, be gentle, and be respectful to them too. Thank you all for joining us at the Progressive Summit. Thank you for supporting our work. I love and appreciate every single one of you all across the state, and I'm so excited to share our summit with you again. This is the 9th annual summit, and we are so thankful to have every single one of you with us today. Now, just a few minutes, you're going to hear music as we switch to the next panel, which is going to be one of my favorite people in Nevada. So you'll hear music for a few seconds, and then we'll be right back with you. Be patient, we'll be right back. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. I am so excited for this next guest that we have open. She has opened every single summit we've had since we started 9 years ago this week. And it's such an honor and privilege because she was my mentor and she taught me literally everything I know and made me who I am today, which is the big mouth fighter and worst person in Nevada, as my little sash says behind me, according to the GOP, which I think is a huge honor. So I want to introduce my friend, my mentor, somebody who's so special to me, Congresswoman Dina Titus, who represents Congressional District 1 in Las Vegas. Welcome, Congresswoman, to the Progressive Summit. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you, Annette. You're too kind with those words, and I congratulate you on being Nevada's worst person. You are known by your enemies as well as by your friends, and that's quite a badge of honor. I also love the fact that we have this tradition of you letting me open the summit because it's such an important part of the political scene here in Nevada. Y'all are so busy, you and Maria and Paula and your whole staff, educating, advocating, instigating, you name it. Y'all are out there doing it. And this summit, everybody looks forward to it every year, and especially going into a new Congress and a new legislative session. So it's great to be part of you, and I welcome everybody who's joined us today. Just a little highlights about what we've done and what we have to do before we start. But let me start with, before we take questions, but let me start with saying that you all were so helpful in my election. I wouldn't be here if it weren't all the things that y'all have done and all the causes you fought for. And you helped stop the red wave. Everybody was talking about it's going to be a big red wave. And that was not the case. You still got the legislature here, most of the statewide offices, very close margin in the House, and of course a majority in the Senate. And we couldn't have done it without y'all's help. You know, Nevada was the hardest hit by the pandemic. We had the pandemic, we had things shut down, we had the unemployment at 35%, but now we're the fastest recovering state. You know, more jobs created, more airplane seats filled, more heads in beds. Conventions are coming back. Look at the big cement convention this week and CES. So we really are on the move here. All the sports things, the race that's coming. So we have a lot to be optimistic about. There's a lot happening. We have a lot to build on that we did in the last Congress with federal recovery dollars put to good use at the state and local levels. But we also have a lot to do. So let me see if I can put it in context. Some of the things that we have accomplished, the state got more money than it knew what to do with. They've never seen that kind of funding because the state in the past, and I know this from experience, has been reluctant to raise taxes and spend state dollars for building an infrastructure that is needed in the modern age. You saw that when the whole unemployment system crashed because they'd never dealt with that many requests before. So there's a lot of money in the state. Now, some of it's already been given out, but a challenge we'll have is to be sure that we know where that money's going. It's going for sustainable projects, and it's going for projects that are equitable, that everybody benefits, top to bottom, left to right. We don't want this to go to just special people, or we want it to go to those who need the most, not those who have the most. So watch that money. It's at the school district, it's local government, state government, RTC. All of these funds are out there, and so let's put them to good use here in Nevada. Now, some of the issues that remain, of course, women's rights. People think we're safe in Nevada, and we are for the time being, but if they pass a national ban on abortion, which they are trying to do, they already passed a couple of bills the very first day of the new Congress, that takes away what we have in Nevada. It negates our protections here. So that will be a cause we'll have to fight. voting rights. Look at what all the states have done. Not Nevada. We have a great Democratic Secretary of State now. And Barbara Sagaski, as a Republican Secretary of State, was a hero. She stood up to the deniers and protected the right to vote in Nevada. But they're coming, they don't ever go away. So that we have to watch. Gun violence, we made some good steps with the first gun violence prevention bill in 40 years. But again, now we've got to deal with bump stocks and machine automatic weapons. So that's still on the agenda. Climate change, we put more money into energy, renewable energy and climate change in the Inflation Reduction Act. But still, they're trying to undo all the regulations that have been put in so they can go back to baby drill, and things that are not sustainable for the planet or for green energy. Healthcare, we got the Medicare folks covered for insulin, but we need to expand that to everybody so that the cap of insulin is $35, not just for Medicare, but for everybody. It's ridiculous that Big Pharma can hold people hostage. And then the one near and dear to my heart that y'all have been so fabulous on is protecting our public lands and creating a VQMA. I cannot thank y'all enough for your advocacy there. And every day I get tweets that I retweet about protecting this special place. And I'm optimistic. We've been working with Interior, all of the groups. We've got the legislation to show that there's support. And I just think we're going to be having a big ceremony out here sometime this spring. So I want you on the front row, Annette, to greet the president and the secretary and declare this wonderful place, this holy, sacred place, protected. So that's what we got to do. But the fight continues. You've got the legislative session. You got a new Congress. Got some new members that you need to educate because a lot is going on. So you can always count on me, just as I always count on you all. And I'm happy to answer any questions about more specifics if you want to do that.
Yeah, we do have some folks in the chat already. So keep putting your questions in the Q&A function. Remember, you can put your name there. You don't have to ask your question anonymously unless you want to, but you can ask your question with a name and put those in the Q&A chat. Our staff are sending those over to me now. I have a couple questions for you, Congresswoman, especially on the legislative process. I want you to put your political science 101 hat on. And, you, like I said, whether it was at UNLV or during the legislative session when I was your intern or your attaché, you taught me so much. And one of the things I really want to talk about is people being realistic going into this legislative session, because we do have a Republican governor, and unfortunately reminds me of the 2007 session when you and I worked together. And I don't know how much might get done this session. So let's just talk to our activists and our volunteers about how to be realistic, but also how to keep the faith and keep fighting and what that could look like.
Well, the Nevada legislature is set up to be secondary to the governor. The people who wrote the Constitution didn't trust politicians. Mark Twain's old saying about sausage. So the governor has a lot of power. He sets forth the budget. He's got all the department heads who are there when the legislature goes home. He's got veto, and there's not a veto override possible in the legislature. One house has that super majority, but the other house doesn't. So he's going to pretty much set the agenda. And I think the legislature will be playing a lot of defense. I don't know how different people feel about splitting up the school district, but that's coming. You can see that coming, and that's something he supports. Big on charter schools, big on privatizing, big on splitting up the school district. So that's a fight I see that y'all are going to have. And that's a defensive fight, not an offensive fight. Already he's called for doing away with a lot of regulations, so wants to be more pro-business. You're going to have to watch that. Some of those regulations may be outdated, may go back to, the Pony Express. You can get rid of those, but don't roll back something that protects Nevada citizens. And so I would say you're playing defense on that as well. And the money, just watch the money. Be sure it doesn't go to special friends and special projects, but it goes to where it's needed most in a way that can be sustained. You don't want one-offs, as they call them. You want something that's going into the base that's going to build. So I'd say you're going to be playing defense. You're going to have a couple of real big issues. I don't know what the two caucuses have put forth as their agenda. I haven't seen that, but certainly we'll be working with you hand in hand with our delegation in Washington and the legislature here to try to be sure that we are all on the same page. And because there's strength in unity, there's power in diversity, but there's strength in unity.
One other question I have, and then we'll get to some of our audience questions, Congresswoman, is, the budgets start closing in Nevada late April, early May. Economic Forum will come out in early May. That kind of sets what the projected budget will be for the next 2 years for the biennium, since we only have a legislative session every other year. During that budget process, there's a lot of negotiation that happens, and there's a lot of, kind of tit for tat between the legislative branch and the governor's office to try and get a budget and get a balanced budget, because we must have that in the state of Nevada. But there's a lot of horse trading that goes on. One of the things I'm worried about is he's going to want us to roll back voting rights, or he's going to want us to implement vouchers. Like you said, he's big on this school choice nonsense. But he's also been big on rolling back criminal justice reforms. What do people need to watch for during that end process? And how can people be involved in that process as they watch the legislative process wrap up?
Well, you're right. It always happens at the last minute, and it happens late at night, and it happens in back rooms. So, that's just a reality. And there will be horse trading, especially with a divided government. So he's going to have his list of priorities. And I would advise the legislature for the Senate and the Assembly to get on the same page. Sometimes when the two houses are not together, that hurts in the negotiation with the governor. I think information is key, and clarity is key. So you got to know what you want, that you're willing to trade. Some of that criminal justice will, he's a policeman, so he's going to look at it differently, probably, say, from the way Aaron Ford looked at it in the last session. So you don't want to see us move backwards. You want to see us move forward. So I think you got to figure out what you absolutely will not trade away, what's less important, and what you can save to fight for another day. Now, I'm not going to tell the legislature how to do it. You've got some great legislators who can know this process and will be very much engaged in it. And I can just say that in Washington, it's even worse. You're talking about this handful of super right-wingers in the House that held McCarthy hostage for 15 votes and finally got their way. So he's wanting to roll back Social Security, roll back Medicare, trade away the debt balance, increasing the debt balance, and these are things that we are going to have to fight for too. Now, we say there's no negotiation at this point because you don't want to start bargaining against yourself, but when the time comes, you got to watch which way it goes.
Speaking of the debt ceiling, we do have a question from our audience. This is anonymous, and they ask, what can we do to help prevent the U.S. government from defaulting? And I think that's something that people are going to learn about very quickly with this Republican Congress, because they're setting us on a path that is very dangerous. So talk to us about that.
Well, the debt ceiling is something artificially set a long time ago that you could get rid of. It's just something that was put in place, kind of like the Economic Advisory Committee at the state level, telling you how much money you expect to get and how much you can spend. There's no reason to have that except political reasons, and it may not even be constitutional. Same thing for the debt ceiling. You can get rid of the debt ceiling, but it becomes a political issue. You want to keep it in place to restrain government. Second thing is it's misnamed debt ceiling. People think that means how much debt you can get. It really, if you don't meet the debt ceiling, it means you're not paying off the bills that you've already accrued. So it really needs another name. It's like paying off your credit card. It's not like getting more stuff. It's like paying off what you've already got. So if you don't pay off your bills, you know what happens to you? Well, same thing for government. If we don't pay our bills, our bond rating falls. The rest of the world's economy is affected. We don't even know what all could happen, but all the economists, and usually you put one economist in a room, they get into an argument. But in this case, they're all pretty much in agreement that if we don't pay our debts and raise that debt ceiling, that it will have pretty drastic consequences for our economy. Now, the Republicans say that they'll only vote to pay the debt ceiling, to raise the debt ceiling, if we cut Social Security and Medicare. Now, they're the only ones calling for this. And the public loves Social Security and Medicare. It's one of the most popular, successful programs out there. But they've been trying to get rid of this for probably since it went into effect. And so, you know, I could never vote to raise the debt ceiling in return for cutting Social Security and Medicare. That's not a vote I would cast. So it's going to be a real difficult negotiating process to save the economy and also save those social programs. Now, right now, we have reached the limit, but there are some financial things that Yellen can do. And it'll really be later in the spring or early summer when you really hit the top and you have to take some action. Now, these Republicans are also saying they're willing to shut down government at the end of the fiscal year. They don't like government. They don't want to help people. They don't want to fool with it. So they're willing to not appropriate funding to keep the government open come September. So it's two big fights, debt ceiling and keeping the government open.
I couldn't agree more. One last question for you, Congresswoman, and this comes from Bernie, and I think this is a really important question because some of the attention has moved off of this. You're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. What is your position on supporting Ukraine, and what's the outlook for your support?
Well, I am on that committee and on the subcommittee that oversees that part of the world. I absolutely support giving Ukraine all that we can because it's a proxy war and it's the way we have of showing we support democracy while also keeping Russia at bay. And they've been very aggressive. And if you let Russia take Ukraine, that's saying to the world, well, maybe we'll let China take Taiwan. You don't want to send out that message. You want the strong message. And also, we have gotten the NATO countries, Western Europe, to commit. And if we don't stay strong, then what does it say to our allies in Europe? That, well, we're not good at our word. We'll say something and do something else. I don't support sending troops. We don't want to see that happen. But short of that, the new tanks that are being sent, the training, the modern equipment overall, I mean, the pictures are just devastating of what Russia is doing. An unprovoked war, an illegal war. They look like World War II. Cities are just wiped out. Civilians are killed. Children are being bombed intentionally. It's just a terrible situation. But certainly the president there has become an international hero, and the people of Ukraine are so respected and so revered that we can't drop back now.
Well, thank you for that. Maria just texted me how much she loves you, and I love you too. I know our entire team and all of the folks watching do as well. You're always one of our most popular guests, and I could talk to you all day. So thank you for sharing your morning with us, and thank you for getting up early to be here to open yet another summit. We appreciate you.
Well, I always want to open it. Don't throw me off of this program, but let's not wait another year before we get together again. And I just want to tell you that Demi Falcon is here, my right hand, and I know friends with you. So we're two people here who want to support the progressive movement.
Well, Demi, I know you all have great social media. How do folks get a hold of Congresswoman Titus's office and get in touch with y'all if they need help?
Sure, you can direct message us. Our Twitter handle is @RepDinaTitus. You can also give us a call. Our number is 702-220-9823. That's our office. And you can also just reach out to me. I know Annette has my personal cell number. I'm willing to share it with you all. So you can always reach out to me as well. And thank you again.
Come to see us in Washington. We're going to need some moral support.
Absolutely, Congresswoman. The new House of Representatives is absolutely horrific. So I'll be out there soon to help you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. We'll be back with you for another panel in about 2 minutes. So stay tuned. You're going to hear some music on the break, and then we'll be back with you. We'll take a short break after the next panel. Again, thank you all for joining us here at the Progressive Summit. Remember, use the chat function if you want to meet new people. That's a great way to meet the folks in the room. We'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. This is our opening panel. Obviously, the Congresswoman just welcomed us and gave us the welcoming speech, which he does every year at the Progressive Summit. But we wanted to start with our theme this year. And this panel is called That Time We Saved Democracy. So we're going to look back for a little bit, and we're going to look at what we did in 2022, because I know our team here at Battleborn Progress is so proud of the good work we did all across the state in 2022, but I know so many partners who are on this call are proud of that too. So we're excited to share this panel with you, and we're so excited to have an amazing panel of guests who will introduce themselves, but I'm just going to give you a preview who's on this panel. So of course, we have our new Secretary of State, thank God, Cisco Aguilar, who's going to be joining us today. We also have Brad Bauman, who is a big brother of Progress Now in Nevada. And we have Bradley Schrager, who keeps me out of jail. He's our attorney, but also we call him Legal Eagle, as we lovingly refer to him here at BBP. And then we have Anna Scholl. She is our National Executive Director for Progress Now, which is our national organization that we are such a proud member of. Again, we're in 26 different states all across the country, and she leads us on that. So I want to bring our new Secretary of State in, Cisco Aguilar. I've known him for years, and Secretary, so excited to have you join us. Thank you for being here. Congratulations on your race. Thank goodness you won, because the alternative was horrific. And just tell us a little bit about what your race meant and why it's so important to focus on a race like Secretary of State.
Absolutely. First, but thank you, Annette, for everything. Thank you to your team, and thank you to all the people on this conference for getting me to the position where I am today. Through your hard work, through your support, we're able to overcome one of the most challenging races I think we had in the Secretary of State race. You know, my opponent was the most dangerous candidate in America. And the reason we say that is because he was making predeterminations about the outcomes of elections in 24 before voters even went to the polls. And that is not the role of the Secretary of State. The role of a Secretary of State is to ensure that the access is given to the voters. And every single voter, no matter what zip code you come from, how tall or short you are, that you have an equal right to cast your vote and have a say in what the future looks like. And so when you talk about access and you talk about people having that fundamental right to vote, I'm going to stand strong and I'm going to fight back and punch back even harder.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. And we're excited to work with you this legislative session to protect all the progress we've made over the past several years and move forward on a lot of new voting rights policies. So during the midterm, a lot of attention was given to the Senate and governor's race here in Nevada, and those are obviously incredibly important. But in my opinion, in Nevada and in several other states, Secretary of State, that race was arguably one of the most important. Explain to us why, and explain to us what was at stake in this past election if we didn't protect those seats.
Well, the Secretary of State serves as a regulator of elections. The 17 counties execute elections on the ground. They run up, they manage them. The Secretary of State serves as a referee. They're responsible ensuring that the counties are following the law, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, that they're giving every eligible voter the opportunity to cast that vote. And if we have somebody in the Secretary of State's office who doesn't respect that responsibility or understand the gravity and the charge of the job, we could be in a situation where we have elections that determine the candidate that none of us ever wanted. And my job is to ensure that all Nevadans have an equal opportunity to cast their right to vote.
Absolutely. So, the lies and the rhetoric around mail ballots and same-day voter registration and all of the different types of voting, both in the 2020 election and in the 2022 election, they're not going away. We know that both parties equally use vote by mail, same-day voter registration. Actually, Republicans use same-day voter registration more than Democrats. All of these different voting rights that we hold near and dear here in Nevada, but all across the country that we have to protect. Now that you're in office, what are some of the most important aspects of your agenda for defending democracy, but also ensuring that all voters, all eligible voters, have accurate information about voting too, and dispelling some of that dis and misinformation that exists out there?
First, we have to recognize that elections occur because of the human component. Our elections work because people are willing to work the polls, they're willing to volunteer, they're willing to dedicate their career to working in election departments. Right now, people are working out of fear, and that is completely unacceptable. So we're going to pass legislation to make it a felony to intimidate and harass election workers and volunteers, because we have to have election workers and volunteers back. If we don't have their back, we're not going to have that human component of elections. We could have all the technology in the world, we could have all the resources in the world, we could have all the polling sites across the state that we want, but if we don't have the human component and we're not protecting the human people who are working these elections, they're not going to run the way we want to, and people are not going to be able to cast that fundamental right to vote. And so really fighting back and bringing back respect, bringing back dignity to our election process, and holding those people who don't respect the rule of law accountable for those actions. And so that's a big push on my part. The other is making sure that in Nevada, we invest right now in an election management system. With an election management system, we can run and we can implement top-down voter registration. I know the original goal was to implement that process in 4 to 6 years. In 4 to 6 years, the technology is going to be obsolete, and we're going to be on to the next generation of technology, and we should be having a different conversation in 4 to 6 years. So my goal as Secretary of State to implement that within the next 2 years. That's a big task. That's a huge responsibility on the Secretary of State's office, but with the right funding, and right now, we have a $2 billion surplus. Now is the time to invest in our election processes. It's time to invest in our election systems and make sure that we're ready to go for the 24 election. So with an election management system, we'll be more transparent. There will be accountability. Having the Secretary of State's office be solely responsible for the voter rolls, we'll be able to ensure that every eligible voter in Nevada has that opportunity to vote.
Thank you, Secretary. We're going to come back to you in just a few minutes. Anna, I want to bring you in. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for joining us all the way from Virginia. Looking back at 2022, you helped us with a tremendous amount of work here in Nevada. So thank you for everything, and thank you for always supporting our work here. Almost every prediction in the media spelled doom and gloom for Democrats. Everything, the sky was going to fall. There was going to be this massive red wave that didn't even turn out to be a trickle. And it was just an emphasis on highlighting the negative: high gas prices, high costs, historical trends. And yet the Democrats largely held the line in key races, like the Secretary of State, like other races up and down our ticket. Heck, Senator Cortez Masto helped save the Senate. We're very proud of that here. So what do you think was the secret sauce that won over voters in the end, despite these narratives? And what lesson should we learn from 2022?
Well, thank you for having me again. It's always a pleasure to spend time with the BVP team. I think fundamentally the core of the answer there is that the narrative was wrong, right? And it's not necessarily a dynamic of how did we overcome odds. It's that the reality on the ground was very different than what the media was portraying. And there's any number of reasons for that, including, a pretty strong devotion among a lot of traditional media for a both sides approach. There was also a concerted attempt by Republicans to really flood the zone with low quality polling to try to project this idea that Republicans were headed for a red wave that was not reflected by the dynamics on the ground in any number of states. But when you get down to brass tacks about what the dynamics were on the ground in so many places, I think there's a couple of really key things to look at. The first is that I don't think that we can underestimate the impact of the Dobbs decision and repealing Roe v. Wade when we look at voter engagement and motivation. Everywhere that abortion was on the ballot, whether it was a red state, a purple state, a blue state, voters came out in droves and voted overwhelmingly to protect access to abortion. And where abortion itself wasn't on the ballot in a referendum or initiative, in the states where abortion access was threatened by MAGA extremist politicians who were running on banning abortion, we saw the same effect. And I think the other thing we really saw in this election, which I think is going to continue to be a core dynamic moving forward, is the degree to which voters are turned off by MAGA extremism. Voters do care about protecting democracy. They care about chaos versus governance, and they care about how that shows up in their everyday lives. And so, while inflation has been an issue, economic recovery out of the pandemic is certainly still an issue, and it's an issue that Democrats in Congress, in states, and President Biden are working intently on. The reality on the ground is that voters don't trust MAGA extremists and their chaotic form of governance to deliver real results for their family.
So Anna, just kind of sticking with that, looking at President Biden's record on things and looking at how President Biden has been able to do a lot of really important work, even across the aisle over the past 2 years. What do you think that looks like for 2024, and how do we build on the success of 2022, even though there was a tremendous amount at stake? And clearly there's so much more work to do to protect democracy. How do we keep this momentum going and keep the work going, despite the attempts from Republicans to maybe roll things back or prevent that progress from happening?
Yeah, I think that there's an incredible contrast and story to tell for the next 2 years and heading into another presidential election about who is working for the American people and who's working for our families, and who is trying to put a 30% sales tax on everything that you buy. While we didn't get everything that we wanted out of the 117th Congress, and in a lot of ways, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are uniquely to blame for that. I think that blame and frustration really has overshadowed an incredible level of accomplishment. When it comes to prescription drug prices, affordable access to insulin, the infrastructure investments that folks are starting to see when it comes to broadband coming to communities, rebuilding roads and bridges, the investments and pivot towards clean energy and a clean energy future. There are really incredible accomplishments to talk about that were brought to you by a Biden-Harris administration and a Democratic Congress. And I think as we move forward into 2024, we're going to have really incredible stories to tell in local communities about what that looks like as those policies are implemented, not just what they look like on paper in DC, but the real experiences of families and what it means for improving, how our communities and the health and financial security of our families moving forward. And the contrast to that is going to be, the chaos and extremism that the Republican House of Representatives are going to bring, right? We're already saw they couldn't even elect a speaker, right? The House in reality is governed by a handful of right-wing, totally off the spectrum of political reality folks, right? The Republican majority is hamstrung by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. They've got a George Santos problem of, they can't even freaking tell the truth or understand who these people are. And they're leveraging all of that to cause more chaos. Right? All of the promises that Kevin McCarthy made to these extremists in order just to get the speaker's gavel are about to come home to roost. And that looks like putting a 30% sales tax on everything that you buy on the House floor. It looks like a death spiral around raising the debt ceiling, which, to be clear, is agreeing to pay for the bills that Donald Trump and a Republican Congress already incurred. This is not about paying for things in the future. This is, we already spent the money and now we don't want to have to pay for it. And that will have, if they get their way, catastrophic impacts on our economy, on families, on everyone's bottom line. And the contrast could not be clearer between a Biden administration that is working for all of us to deliver real results and a MAGA extremist small group of folks who want to walk us off the cliff.
Well, just so you know, Congresswoman Titus literally just said those exact words about the debt ceiling. So you're in great company today, Anna. Thank you. I'll come back to you in just a second. Bradley, I want to bring you in and talk specifically about here in Nevada, because you and I have been in this fight for a long time together here in Nevada. 2022 was, again, doom and gloom for Nevada, but it just didn't pan out that way. And I personally think Governor Lombardo was kind of an accident. And unfortunately, Governor Sisolak was held accountable for saving people's lives during the pandemic. So there was supposed to be a red wave, and yet the Democratic candidates mostly won up and down the ticket. We're very proud of that. What do you think this shows about our electorate here in Nevada, and how will it affect the upcoming Nevada legislative session, which we start on February 6th?
Yeah. First of all, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. Always happy to be here every year. You know, that's a really excellent question, and I think that while Democrats put up excellent candidates across the board, they also got very, very lucky in their opponents. The GOP has a tremendous problem generating candidates who are acceptable or palatable in a general election context. And until they figure that out, they're going to have tremendous problems. But the sort of red waveism that we heard for so long was also born of their historical patterns. People expected the things that had always happened to happen again. They didn't, and it wasn't just because people love Democrats, because they don't. And I would caution Democrats from taking that lesson away from 2022, because that's not what happened. In some ways, voters are acting in ways that they had not acted before. So you can't count on pundits or political scientists to tell you, well, this has happened previously in midterm elections, it's going to happen in the future. We are at an inflection point in democratic expression. People are mistrustful. People are obviously having a very difficult time getting proper information. So I think that as far as this session goes, not just here, but Congress and state, local, and federal governments everywhere, is that the title of this session is How We Save Democracy. But in some ways, democracy needs to respond in kind. Democracy has to demonstrate that it will deliver things in people's lives, that it will make good things happen for people, and that it will prevent bad things from happening. Because when people look around and they see that, constant economic dislocations and crises rooted in inequality, when wages went up over the last few years, it wasn't because Congress went and did that, even though the Nevada legislature did, and we changed the Constitution as well. Wages in large part went up because workers acted. They did those things. So there are, voters in the electorate are learning how to express themselves in new ways. And if Democrats, if legislators, if all of us don't learn to speak a new political language, then in fact, democracy won't have been saved on an ongoing basis. It will have been momentarily preserved.
Thank you, Bradley. So there are a lot of threats that we have to face head on. There's a lot of mis and disinformation out in the community that we hear every single day. We still hear. And, when we were planning for this panel with all of you, we talked a lot about that. How does mis and disinformation play into the 2020 election, the 2022 election? It's going to play into the 2024 election. And I also think there's a lot of threats coming from certain candidates like Donald Trump and others that they just keep repeating this nonsense. But people believe it. People think this is reality and real. You know, about legal fights and challenges to the voting counting process in 2022. Luckily, all those things didn't materialize, but what changed this time versus how the Trump campaign acted in 2020, and what do we see for the future? What's coming in the future for this kind of nonsense around our election process and around protecting people's rights to vote, but also making sure that we're countering that mis and disinformation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a panoramic question, but it's a great one. I mean, you all will remember, and I play my trade largely as an election lawyer, right? I mean, this is what I do. And I spent months, both before and after the 2020 election, in court. That didn't happen in 2022, even though we were prepared to deal with all manner of election challenges. But I think two things sort of sidetrack that, and I don't think that that the threat has evaporated, but it's changing. Number one was the results. The legal actions on behalf of candidates to overturn elections or to attack the process were by and large abject failures everywhere in 2020. And what few I had to deal with in 22, there weren't any victories for them. They didn't win anything. And related to that is those things cost money, right? There's a check on my office wall from the Trump campaign for $75,000 because they had to pay my costs in the 2020 campaign. I treasure that, keep that forever. But all of the election challenges I had to fight and beat back in 2020 cost somebody money. They cost April Becker money. They cost Jim Marchand money. They cost all these people real cash. And even fanatics at some point can understand that their resources are being misplaced if nothing ever changes. So, these people still believe and still have acolytes who believe that elections were stolen and fraudulent. That's not going away. The expression through legal action is dissipating. Now, the way you look at that, I think, is to be, happy that that's true. But the energy that is being stored up and the frustration that's out there still exists and still has to be dealt with. It's just going to be expressed differently. So I think that once again, sounding a bit of a warning, if Democrats and other people of good faith are unable to talk to those people and to express themselves to those people regarding the electoral process and voting rights and all of those things, there is going to be a release of that energy and an expression of that frustration in ways we haven't seen yet, but I think are going to be incredibly dangerous for the health of the system.
Thank you for that, Bradley, and we'll bring it right back in just a second. Brad, I want to bring you in. So you work at the national level, and in terms of the failure of the red wave, or what it wasn't even a red trickle in 2022, how were Nevada's results similar or different to those from across the country, and what trends are you starting to see from that data?
First off, thank you for having me. It's really great to be back here with y'all and just enjoy this every single year. So the results that we saw in Nevada are very similar to what we saw across the board in many states that are of particular focus to national party operatives on both sides. We definitely saw where the ways in which we decided at a national level, all of the different party committees, all the different organizations that are involved, all the different nonprofits and everybody else who was kind of involved in either the education or the registration or the activation of voters, really came away with some key lessons, I think, from previous elections. And one of those key lessons that we learned was, as Democrats, not to start the sentence in the middle. One of the things that we've done over and over again is that we've assumed knowledge. We've assumed that folks who are voting in midterm elections have a really solid understanding of what a state legislator does, what a secretary of state does, what some of these down ballot races and positions really do, and how they affect folks' lives in much greater ways than who their congressman is a lot of time. Stuff that kind of got lost when America stopped really teaching civics to its students in a really key way. And so a lot of folks have spent a lot of time, both during the election period, but also before the election period, to really explain the stakes of these races that folks really don't necessarily pay attention to. And I think that's a very valuable lesson to every one of us who's involved as an activist or involved as an operative or gets involved as a volunteer on a campaign. That's not to say that we talk down to people, right? What we have to do, though, is we have to remind them about the real impact that these lower races have, these down ballot races have, to ensure that folks are turning out, that they understand that it is so important, even in these non-presidential years, to show up and exercise their voice. When we look at states where there was key Secretary of State races, like Secretary Aguilar's, if we look at Pennsylvania, if we look at Wisconsin, if we look at Arizona, if we look at Michigan, across the board in these very key battleground states, we were able to not only ensure that folks were turning out across every age demographic, but also making sure that folks really understood, oh yeah, Secretary of State is exceptionally important to vote for because they are gatekeepers to our democracy, because they are going to ensure that the rules apply to everyone, because when they're functioning correctly, they are going to ensure that every eligible vote counts. And really, we can all agree that when every eligible American participates, our democracy is stronger. So with that being said, I think that what you've seen is a real concerted effort on behalf of folks to focus on these down ballot races, to ensure that these down ballot races are resourced correctly, to make sure that folks understand how important those races are, and then make sure that folks are actually completing their ballot on those races.
Thanks, Brad. And, one more question for you while we're here, and then we'll do another round. Just a reminder for those at home, if you're watching and you have questions, I'm seeing them coming in. We have your questions. We'll get to those at the end of the panel. But we have one more round of my questions, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. Brad, while the midterm was an electoral defeat for the political right, many vulnerable communities are still under attack in the form of physical violence, political violence, people being targeted by hate groups, especially our LGBTQ plus community, our Latino community, others. How does our strategy as progressives need to shift or change to be in solidarity with all of our communities, and especially those who are bearing the brunt of the political violence, of the political hate speech, of this kind of misinformation that is truly violent for our communities?
I really appreciate the question. And as we just saw this past week in neighboring New Mexico, the lies, the disinformation that is being spread has a real effect in terms of people's lives, in terms of violence, in terms of compelling folks who are not just buying into these lies, but ultimately are looking at those lies and saying, if I don't do something about it, nothing is going to get done. And so they are inspired to act violently. I think that there are a bunch of different things that we need to do. And the first is that as activists and as folks who really genuinely care about what we see happening in our democracy, I think that, and this sounds like a small thing, but it really isn't. I think we all need to get much more engaged in the fight over how internet platforms are encouraging or not encouraging disinformation, how their business practices, how their algorithms are encouraging the spread of disinformation and misinformation. I think that we need to start getting more active in holding them more accountable. I also think we need to get more active and more accountable with a lot of the things that are coming up as free speech, but to be completely honest, doesn't qualify as free speech, but is not getting kind of dealt with because folks are so afraid that it becomes a slippery slope. So number one, I think that we really need to talk to our elected officials to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to create a legal framework to deal with it. Secondarily, though, and this is something that I look forward to talking with a lot of folks about later on today, it's making sure that you're playing an active role in your own communities, with your own friends and with your own relatives, to compassionately set the record straight, to ensure that the ways in which you're communicating and the things in which that you are saying are first really addressing kind of the emotional state that people are in terms of like why they are so receptive to this information, and being okay with like delving into folks with that and saying, look, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be angry. I'm afraid and angry a lot of the time too. But let's separate fact from fiction and let's really talk about what's actually going on and what's actually wrong in order to ensure that your friends and relatives who might think about the world in different ways than we do as progressives are at least able to look at you as a family member, as a friend, as somebody that they can say, you know what, I do trust them. And maybe we can walk them back from the ledge a little so that they're not spreading that sort of stuff, so that they're not giving a voice to it, and that ultimately we're kind of inoculating it with love for our friends and relatives.
Thank you for that, Brad. So now I want to look forward. Before we get to audience questions, I want to look forward at what do we do next to protect our democracy? How do we look forward, into this next legislative session, which Nevada is about to start in about 2 weeks? How do we look forward to 2024? And frankly, how do we look beyond 2024? Because I think as progressives, we need to start looking far further into the future, because I think the right is so good about doing that. They are playing the long game. And sometimes we're so focused on the minute stuff, the micro stuff, that we forget about planning for the future. And we really need to think about that. So with that being said, Secretary Aguilar, from a communication standpoint, how can grassroots people, activists like the ones we have on the summit today, or non-governmental organizations, nonprofits like mine who are nonpartisan, better educate members of our communities across Nevada about Nevada's election policies, about what the laws are, and also how do we protect our election workers going forward? Because I think that's going to be a really important part of making sure we're protecting our elections process.
Thank you for the question. Annette, I think you hit it on the head, right? We have to be strategic. And in order to be strategic, we have to have a plan. I think we have to avoid being reactive. In a lot of situations, we're being reactive. And when we're being reactive, it brings out a lot of emotion. And we're not talking in a way that, in a process that we can win. Being strategic, having a plan, coming together and agreeing what we're going to do over the next 4 years, 6 years, and really driving forward to that goal. So we have to come together as a community, as activists, to sit at the table and say, what is our goal? How are we going to get there? What are the milestones we need to achieve over the 24 election, over the 26 election, and continue to drive that forward? Again, I'm going to go back to protecting our election workers. Our election workers have to know we have their back, and we're not going to tolerate the behavior that is occurring. Nobody should ever have to go to work in fear. And when that occurs, we're not going to recruit the talent we need to be working our elections. Right now in the Secretary of State's office, we have a huge vacancy rate. And I think it's present throughout state government, but especially in election departments. You're seeing a lot of transition of that talent leave the different counties. We're having new talent come in, which is good because they're bringing fresh perspective. They don't have the baggage of past history, but we need these individuals to understand what it means for them to be in these roles. And so that's part of the communication, is getting the clerks throughout the 17 counties to understand what the goal is for the future. and keep everybody going and having dialogue, having conversation. But it starts now. We have to get to work now, and we have to be present, but we have to do it in a way where we're constantly building trust.
Thank you, Secretary. Bradley, I want to bring you in for the Nevada perspective as well as we start to look forward. Do you think, with your Trump check on the wall, that the election fraud narrative and all the BS that comes from that and from the right is changing the GOP strategy due to the failure and the spectacular failure, especially here in Nevada, from people like Adam Laxalt, of so many Stop the Steal lawsuits? And how does that change our response in the future? And I'm gonna add a little something to this because I saw it from our questions coming in. Do you think if their Stop the Steal lawsuits continue to fail, they start to move back to violence like we saw on January 6th?
Yeah, that's the really crucial question, is that with the failure of what I'll call legal or means within the system for them to alter reality in ways that fit this particular narrative of fraudulence and stealing and all of these things. The fear is that that energy has to go somewhere. Continuing to fail, which if they pursue lawsuits and at least here in Nevada, legislative avenues, that's not a fruitful space for them to be putting their efforts. So where will that go? It is hard to imagine sustained and effective political violence, but I think all across the country we're seeing punctuated events of violence. We may in fact see more of those over time. That's not out of line in American history, as unfortunate as that is. I mean, if you read about the late 60s and the early 70s, political violence was a fact of life. It's obviously incredibly lamentable, and we need to be on guard for it all of the time. But if your strategy is to simply try to keep convincing people that the evidence before their eyes is false, that the elections that they're participating in are charades, that everyone is corrupt and everything is explainable by a conspiracy that you can't quite name but you know is out there, that's incredibly dangerous to the sort of collective political brain, right? That will disease our abilities to solve real political problems. And so I would urge any friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle, from us and from Democrats, to start to find ways to pull yourself out of that hole, because it doesn't work politically, it doesn't work economically, it doesn't work socially. It is in the end, it is nihilistic, and cannot but end poorly for everyone if it ends. I mean, look, there'll be something on the other side of this, right? This isn't our perpetual lives for the next half century. There's something on the other side of this. But how we deal with this problem of, we sort of use the shorthand denialism, right? But it's sort of bigger than that, right? That's just a sort of shorthand we use for people who at this point are apparently convinced that everything in life is is subject to levers being pulled behind the scenes that are working against them. If you don't find some way out of that trap, our friends on the right, it's very hard to think of a successful future that in which this country, this state and this country, is inhabited by people who can talk to each other and reach policy decisions that are good for more than just a very small constituency.
Thank you, Bradley. Brad, I want to bring you on this topic kind of nationally. What do you anticipate the right's next electoral strategy to be in light of these MAGA, Trump-backed candidates losing across the board in 2022? And I'll just add, and the shenanigans going on in the House of Representatives where, like Anna said, they can't even elect a speaker, let alone lead on real things.
I would love to be able to come here and say that they took a long, hard look at what happened in 2022 and had a soul-searching moment, and they're gonna come back at us with a bunch of candidates who have renewed their respect for the democratic process. Unfortunately, that is not what's going to happen. We are going to see where the MAGA wing of the party, now that they have power, is going to fight tooth and nail in order to maintain that power. They are also going to double down on these tactics, knowing full well that in the past, what they've been able to do with a lot, what gave rise to this whole thing to begin with was by pushing the envelope, pushing the Overton window further and further and further towards these things, while at the same time wearing us as progressives and wearing moderates down to the point where, we were exacerbated and unable to really fight with everything that we have. And I think that that's what we can expect to see in 2024. They're going to reload with a whole bunch of new folks who are going to lie their way towards Congress, who are going to represent the absolute worst instincts of the most extreme populations in our country, and that is why our work was not finished in 2022. It really just began. We put ourselves into a great position for 2024 to at least ensure that votes in key states will get counted fairly. But now we need to ensure that we are ever vigilant in fighting these folks back, because they're coming at us again.
Thank you, Brad. All right, just a reminder, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A section now. We'll take a couple of questions. We won't get to them all, but we will take a couple of questions for our panelists here shortly. Anna, I want to continue looking forward to what's next and lessons learned. Looking forward, how should all of us progressives be looking to define the Biden-Harris administration in anticipation for the 2024 election? I know that's going to be a tremendous amount of Progress Now's work and our work here in Nevada for Battleborn Progress. And does the outcome of the GOP primary, whether it's Trump versus DeSantis or whatever weirdos they get up there, weigh on this at all?
That's a great question. I would say no. I don't think who Republicans end up nominating impacts what we say about us and what we're for and what we're fighting for, right? We talked about before the accomplishments of the first 2 years of the Biden-Harris administration, the way that they have been delivering for families. I think that's a story that we continue to have to tell and make really personal and talk about those impacts on families across Nevada, across the country. But fundamentally, I think, one, we're going to have to make the argument that boring is sexy, right? Like, we don't need another insurrection. We don't need another 15, 16 votes, whatever it was, to elect a speaker, right? We need boring people in DC who are going to go do the boring work every day of governing and paying our bills and making sure people get their Social Security checks and can access health care. And all of those things that are, fundamentally a little boring. Boring is sexy. But I think the other thing that we have to, be aware of and continue to push back and fight back against, the name of this panel is Democracy Saved. And that is true this time for this year, right? And it is, we live to fight another day. And I wouldn't want anyone to go home and misconstrue that as democracy is safe and we don't have anything else to do. And it is not, it is very much still on the line. We are still on that razor's edge. And that is because, in large part, Donald Trump is not an anomaly, right? He is the natural conclusion of a Republican Party that for years has flirted with white supremacy and white nationalism and fascism, and is now fully embracing that. Donald Trump is the godfather of MAGA extremism, and Ronald DeSantis is the heir apparent. There is only personality differences there and a different face to put on the extremism calling card. And we have to continue to work every day to make sure that voters understand that they are the same. That agenda is the same. And that agenda is to make sure that the rich get richer while nobody else can get ahead, to place a lot of blame on immigrants, on people of color, on LGBTQIA communities, to distract from the ways that they are trying to undermine democracy, consolidate power for fascists, and promote a white supremacist agenda while corporations make it.
Couldn't agree more. All right, we're going to move to audience questions. Bradley, I'm going to come to you. There's a ton for Secretary Aguilar, so we're going to take those next. Everybody wants to know from our new Secretary of State. They're excited to talk to you. So, but Bradley, this one's going to trigger you a little bit because my eyes start twitching. So get ready. Mary Richardson wants to know, what do you think about ranked choice voting? And I thought you were the perfect person to let us know about that.
I have mixed reactions to it. I mean, I think that it's anytime you're introducing innovation regarding how people vote or how they deal with their ballot, you are going to have some individual problems, right? People are going to have difficulty with that. Just like when you make it harder with to register, if you make it harder to find your polling place, you're going to have drop off, and that's almost always going to manifest itself more prominently in communities of color or language minorities or economic minorities. So on that basis, I think it's a pretty bad time, given the fragility of our system at the moment, to be doing that. At the same time, I also think that it's, whatever you think about political parties as a way of organizing politics, ranked choice voting is a direct attack on parties, right? Which is fine if that's what you want to do, but I think it should be more clearly stated that it's a way of both going around or essentially eating away at political parties and their role in American life, which some people may say is terrible. It hasn't always been terrible, and it's a functional way of organizing politics. So I think we should be aware of it if we're going to go down the ranked choice vote. But if people vote for it again, that's what we'll have.
Just a note, Battleborn Progress was opposed to the current version on the ballot. We would not normally oppose it, but the way it was done this time, we were opposed to that. Thank you, Bradley. All right, Secretary, we got a lot of questions for you, so we're going to pick three. Mary also asks, and this was upvoted 3 times, so remember at home, you can upvote the questions if you have the same question. Mary asks, as an election worker, I have seen and worked with people who sign up to work just so they can sabotage our system. How do we prevent this in the future?
That's a great question. Again, that goes back to the counties and the counties having the resources to be able to counter this. The more election workers we have, the more election workers are committed to working at the polls, working at the county level, the better quality of individuals we're going to get. And these yahoos aren't going to be present because their services aren't going to be needed.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right. Our next question is from David Hatton. Hello, David. Good to see you today. The timing of the primary for the next election, what is the Secretary of State's role to make this happen? And I think we're probably talking about the presidential primary since we've moved on from a caucus system. Talk to us about that.
So we're working on that. We're trying to get all the details together because, again, the primaries, especially at the presidential, are determined by the parties. And so working with the parties to make sure that we understand exactly what needs to occur and what's going to happen. I think what we're all waiting to hear is, are we going to have a presidential primary, or is the incumbent going to seek re-election? And so once we know that information, we'll be able to plan.
Awesome. This next question I think is a fantastic one. It's from GL702, and they ask, how can the Secretary of State in Nevada, or how is the Secretary of State in Nevada going to be able to provide and improve language access for Nevada voters, especially since Nevada is a multicultural state?
It's a great question. It's one of the things I discuss regularly on the campaign, especially in Elko County, where we have a large Latino population, and our AAPI community here in Las Vegas and Clark County. We have a budget request. Obviously, we submitted it. Barbara Sagaski submitted it before I came into office to increase that budget allowance to allow that to occur. So we hope it's in the governor's recommended budget. If not, we're ready to go to legislative leadership and ask for it and make it a priority.
And this last question I think is really important because people don't realize that your office also works with businesses across the state. It's not just elections. So also from GL702, how does the Secretary of State, how can they help small business owners, and what are you working on to help small business owners across the state?
Well, the reason I got into the Secretary of State's office as an attorney, I've done corporate filings my whole career. And I went to do one in February 2020. The system was down for the entire month of February. That sucks because, yes, I'm an attorney, but there's so many small businesses out there that can't afford to hire an attorney. And it drove me crazy to know that the system wasn't functioning the way it should function. And that's one of the original reasons I got into the sector. And when I started learning more about the Secretary of State's race, the November 2020 election, I got fired up. But going back to that basic principle of we need to do a better job with our system, again, it goes back to budget. Having the budget surplus we have, this is the time to do one-shot projects. One of the major requests we put into the budget, and Governor Sisolak gladly put it in there, was a $15 million allocation for a revamp and a redo of Silver Flume to help our small business community so they don't have to hire an attorney to deal with our office.
Thank God. I'm so happy about this. He's already told me about this, and I'm a big fan of redoing Silver Flume. That is, for those who don't know, that's the current Small Business Secretary of State website or business website where you have to do all your filings, and it's not great. So thank you, Secretary. I also know we talked about improving the actual website too for your office, which would be fantastic for voters.
And we do have a budget allocation request. So hopefully we'll see on Monday where all of this falls. But if not, we're going to the legislature with our request list.
Well, thank you. And last but certainly not least, for Brad Bauman, Matt Kimball would like to know what the name of your cat is. And I just want to note that there are 2 cats present. So please answer that question quickly.
Oh boy, this is going to be a really difficult one because there's a little bit of a story behind it. So the little black cat that you saw running back and forth, his name is Dan Marino Super Bowl ring. For those of you who are football fans, you know Dan Marino does not have a Super Bowl ring. And the reason why is because I am a big Miami Dolphins fan, but I also lost the naming rights to my cat in a bet. And so my friends decided to troll me on it. And so I love you all and thank you for the question. And boy, oh boy, was that difficult to say in front of such a large audience.
He also has Pumpkin, who is my I love him. So say hello to both. All right, friends. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Bradley, Anna, Brad, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for always supporting our work. Appreciate everything. And Secretary, we're looking forward to working with you this session to protect all of our elections and workers and businesses all across the state. So thank you for your hard work. For those at home, we're going to take a quick break. You're going to be released. Go to the tables. Remember, just double click on the tables and you can talk to people, and we'll be back right after the break with our next panel. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in a few minutes.